To the US now, where the Supreme Court has heard arguments about whether Donald Trump is immune from prosecution for actions he took while president. The justices have been asked to consider whether any president should have full or partial immunity. The outcome will determine, among other things, whether Mr. Trump should face trial on charges he plotted to overturn his 2020 election defeat. With the latest from New York, here's CBS correspondent Jared Hill.
The Supreme Court yesterday in this case around the question of just how much immunity does former President Trump or any president of the U.S. for that matter have when it comes to criminal prosecution related to official acts that they are conducting as president. And what we heard from the justices is it seems as though the majority don't believe that there is this widespread blanket immunity for official acts as former President Trump has made a claim. Instead, it does seem as though there might be some sort of middle ground that they're focusing on. Now, with that, there potentially could be the possibility that if they rule in that way, that this case gets then struck down back to a lower courts, which would snowball, delaying another bigger case here that's going on. This federal election interference case that former President Trump is facing that potentially could end up getting pushed beyond this November's election. Back to you.
Yeah, so take us through what we can expect today at the Supreme Court and also with Donald Trump's ongoing trial in New York.
What's happening, friends? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast right now. The Supreme Court just demolished Trump's entire legal fortress in a single shadow docket order, stripping away the one shield he believed was unbreakable and sending Washington into constitutional chaos. The Supreme Court dropped a nuclear bomb on the White House. That's not an exaggeration. That's not clickbait. That's the reality of a 5-4 ruling that came down through the shadow docket.
Right. So the Supreme Court today is going to continue on with deciding how they're going to decide on that case. Meanwhile, we do have this hush money case happening in New York City. This one in New York State. This is not related really to that Supreme Court case, which kind of makes all of this a bit confusing. But this one, again, continues to go on. And the question around this is whether former President Trump was involved in this illegal scheme back before the 2016 election. If he was involved in this scheme to disclose hush money payments made to a woman claiming to have been in an affair with him. He says none of this happened. He says he didn't do anything wrong here. Today we're expecting for the former publisher of the National Enquirer to be back on the stand because he's someone who was integrally a part of all of these transactions that are said to have been made in order to sort of catch and kill stories that looked unfavorable to the former president or to, I guess, then candidate Trump at the time. And so he's going to be back on the stand. The defense, the former president's legal team, is going to be questioning him as they continue to try and poke holes in some of these arguments that the former president, again, orchestrated this scheme illegally to disclose some of those payments.
Typically reserved for boring administrative technicalities, and instead delivered the single most devastating legal blow to Trump's presidency since he took the oath of office. Chief Justice John Roberts, the same conservative who has protected Republican interests in countless high-stakes cases, crossed the aisle and joined all 4 liberal justices. Let that sink in. The man who saved the Affordable Care Act, the man conservatives have trusted with their most important legal battles, looked at Trump's defiance of court orders and said, enough.
Jared Hill there. Well, Faith Gay is a former federal prosecutor. I asked her what she made of the arguments that have been put forward in the case at the Supreme Court so far.
The Supreme Court arguments are finished, and now it is up to the Supreme Court as to when they'll issue a decision. Yesterday's arguments did not suggest that any of the justices, except perhaps Amy Coney Barrett, were mindful of moving in any particular hurry. It may be that Trump actually wins in a certain sense by losing this case. As was mentioned, no one thinks that the president gets immunity for private acts. And then the debate is what is an official act for which he should receive immunity? Many of the conservative justices were very worried about the future, which is, can a new president come in and just vindictively prosecute his predecessor? The more progressive justices were worried about the fact that in this country, no one wants to have a king. They don't want a president to come into office and know that he can do anything and have immunity. So this debate is very robust, and there's a real chance that the case gets sent back to the lower court to define where is the line between official and unofficial. If that happens, in a sense, former President Trump wins, because that delays his criminal case potentially till after the election.
Yeah, the justices were really very much aware of the decision making here and how that could weigh in the future democracy of the country, weren't they?
The ruling is brutal in its clarity. No ambiguity, no wiggle room. The Supreme Court declared that Trump has zero immunity from criminal contempt of court. Zero. Not partial immunity. Not immunity that kicks in after he leaves office. No protection whatsoever. Every single argument Trump's legal team has been making for months.
Yeah, so they're very mindful of what a big decision this could be. Again, particularly the conservative justices were thinking, what is the precedent that is set? Will we end up seeing every former president indicted by his political predecessor or his political successor? But the justices did not seem to want to talk about the case in front of them, or they were thinking about the future, except for perhaps Justice Jackson and Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor. With respect to what will happen now, again, the key issue is whether this case will be so delayed by this forward-looking debate, trying to get the line right between official acts and unofficial acts. And unofficial acts, of course, there will be no immunity. And whether that process drags on so much that there is no decision in the criminal trial below, no jury verdict, before the presidential election. And then if Trump wins, he can certainly end that prosecution himself.
Yeah, how much attention is this getting there in the US? How concerned are people about what could happen here?
That a sitting president can't be prosecuted for contempt, that executive authority overpowers judicial authority, that no court can touch the president, just evaporated. But here's where this gets truly terrifying for Trump. The Supreme Court didn't just say he lacks immunity. They went further. They explicitly validated that Congress has a direct constitutional path to impeachment based on contempt alone. The highest court in the land just told the House of Representatives,
I think it's getting a huge amount of attention. Interestingly, the last huge trials in the U.S., for example, the O.J. Simpson trial on our West Coast, were completely televised. And this country is very used to being able to get its legal news and being able to actually see it on TV. Here, interestingly, the New York state courts, where Trump is on trial right now, and the Supreme Court do not televise arguments. So all of it is a little bit behind closed doors, so to speak. They're public, but it's very much dependent on secondary perception, on great reporting by folks like you. But it's a little bit concerning, I think, in the U.S. that they're not able to actually see what is happening. Having said that, there is extreme interest, particularly in the Supreme Court argument, lots of concern on the liberal or progressive side that many justices on the court seem to think that the president should be immune for almost any act associated with his office, and that a president could be elected knowing that once he gets into office, the criminal consequences are almost nil. So yes, huge interest here.
Faith Gay there. Well, Donald Trump's criminal trial around hush money payments continues today. This is the scene in New York outside Trump Tower while we wait for him to leave and head down to the courthouse. Of course, Trump has pleaded not guilty and denies falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels.
You have the power to remove this president for defying the courts. Go ahead. The law is on your side. Think about what that means. For months, literally months, Trump has been hiding behind immunity claims like a child hiding behind a shield made of cardboard. His lawyers have stood in courtrooms and argued with straight faces that presidents are somehow above the law, that executive authority supersedes judicial authority, that the Constitution designed the president as a king who answers to no court. The Supreme Court just laughed that argument out of the room. That entire legal strategy is dead, finished, buried, no appeal, no do-over. The court ruled definitively that defying court orders constitutes an impeachable offense. Congress can remove Trump for contempt. The House can impeach. The Senate can convict. All of it validated by 9 black robes who just told America that nobody, not even the president, is above the law. This is unprecedented in American history. No Supreme Court has ever issued a shadow docket order like this. Shadow docket decisions are supposed to be technical rulings about procedural questions, administrative stuff, minor legal disputes that need quick answers without full briefing. But this This is the Supreme Court using an emergency procedure to resolve a fundamental constitutional question about presidential power and congressional authority. They didn't take months. They didn't schedule oral arguments. They didn't wait for written briefs. They treated this as the emergency it is and acted immediately. And the timing couldn't be more explosive. This decision lands exactly as Kash Patel stares down an arrest deadline, exactly as Judge Boasberg prepares to send federal marshals into the FBI director's office. Exactly as the Epstein files hover on the brink of release, the Supreme Court looked at all of that and said, Judge Boasberg is right. Federal marshals can make arrests, and if the president tries to stop them, Congress can remove him. The court's ruling validates everything Boasberg has been threatening. For weeks, he's been warning about contempt arrests, about jail time for anyone who defies his orders. Trump's lawyers have been arguing that the president and his appointees are immune from such enforcement. The Supreme Court just demolished that defense. Judges have the power to enforce their orders. Federal marshals can arrest you for contempt. And if you're the president, Congress can remove you from office. Now look at Capitol Hill. Absolute chaos. Riots breaking out. Over 200 arrests already. Trump supporters are losing their minds because they understand exactly what this Supreme Court ruling means. They understand that the immunity shield is gone. They understand that impeachment isn't a theoretical threat anymore. It's happening. And they're rioting because they know the game is over. The system is finally working the way the founders designed it, and that terrifies them. House Resolution 415 is already moving. Democrats drafted it within hours of the ruling hitting the docket. They're pushing for a 72-hour impeachment vote. That's 3 days from ruling to floor vote. They want to move before Republicans can organize opposition, before Trump can pressure Senate Republicans, before the window of opportunity closes. This is impeachment machinery shifting into overdrive, and it's happening at lightning speed. The charges in House Resolution 415 are significant. Oath-breaking. Trump violated his constitutional oath to uphold the law. Pentagon interference, tying directly to military leaks and alleged obstruction within the Defense Department. Judicial obstruction, the direct contempt charge that follows the Supreme Court's ruling. Criminal contempt grounded explicitly in the court's constitutional analysis. These aren't vague accusations for political theater. These are specific, legally grounded charges that the Supreme Court has now blessed as valid grounds for removal. Let me break down what the Supreme Court actually ruled here, because this is the kind of decision that law students will study for decades. The shadow docket is a technical procedure the court uses for emergency motions and time-sensitive situations. It's supposed to be for procedural questions, minor legal disputes, technical issues that need quick resolution without full briefing. It's not supposed to handle massive constitutional crises about presidential immunity. Those are supposed to go through normal procedures with full briefings, oral arguments, published opinions explaining every aspect of the reasoning. But this case didn't follow that path. The Supreme Court issued a shadow docket order that directly addresses presidential immunity from contempt charges, and the vote was 5-4. Chief Justice Roberts joined the 4 liberal justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, Jackson, and presumably another justice in the liberal bloc. That's your 5-4 majority. That's the decisive vote that changes everything. The ruling explicitly says that presidential immunity does not extend to criminal contempt violations. The Constitution allows courts to enforce their orders against all persons, including presidents. And crucially, the court affirmed Congress's impeachment power as a remedy for such violations. Congress can impeach and remove a president for defying court orders. That's now the law of the land. What makes this shadow docket ruling particularly striking is that it bypassed all normal Supreme Court procedure. There was no full briefing, no oral arguments, no published written opinion explaining the reasoning. Just a 5-4 ruling stating the outcome. And that tells you something about how urgent the court felt this was. They treated this as an emergency. They decided that normal procedures were too slow. They looked at the constitutional crisis unfolding and said, we have to act now. Chief Justice Roberts voting with the liberals is the story that changes everything, because it means this isn't a partisan decision. It's not the liberals imposing their will on a conservative court. This is a 5-4 decision where the Chief Justice of the United States sided with the liberal bloc. The argument for Trump's immunity was so weak that even the conservative Chief Justice rejected it. The rule of law argument was so strong that Roberts couldn't vote for presidential immunity. That's devastating for Trump's legal team. That tells every lawyer in America that their immunity defense was never going to work. The timing of this decision is crucial. It comes right after Kash Patel's arrest deadline passed, right after Judge Boasberg made his contempt threat concrete, right as the Epstein files are about to be released. The Supreme Court didn't wait. They didn't take months to deliberate. They acted immediately because they recognized that executive defiance had reached a breaking point. The court said, "We're not going to tolerate this level of executive defiance. We're not going to allow presidents to ignore court orders. We're not going to let this continue." What's happening right now is historically unprecedented. American history has never seen a moment like this. The Supreme Court has never issued a shadow docket ruling validating impeachment power against a sitting president for court defiance. Congress has never moved to impeach a sitting president within 72 hours of a Supreme Court ruling. The Capitol has never experienced riots of this scale during active impeachment proceedings. This is uncharted constitutional territory. The Capitol chaos with over 200 arrests shows how seriously people understand this moment. Trump supporters are rioting because they understand what the Supreme Court ruling means. They understand that Trump's legal shield is gone. They understand that impeachment is no longer a theoretical possibility. It's imminent. It's real. And their response is chaos. Their response is desperation because they know what comes next. What comes next is a House floor vote on impeachment. The Democrats control the House. They have the votes. They can impeach Trump. That's almost certain. The only question is whether any Republicans will vote to impeach him. Will any Republicans cross party lines? That's the political question. But the constitutional question is already settled. The Supreme Court has ruled that impeachment is valid. Congress has the power, so the House vote likely results in impeachment. And then it goes to the Senate. The Senate holds a trial. The Senate votes on removal. And here's where things get really interesting, because removal requires a 2/3 majority, 67 senators. The Democrats control 50 senators. They need 17 Republican senators to vote for removal. Is that possible? Will 17 Senate Republicans vote to remove Trump from office? That's the question that determines whether this process actually removes Trump or whether it stalls in the Senate. But the Supreme Court ruling changes everything about how senators think about this vote, because now they're not voting on whether impeachment is constitutional. The Supreme Court has answered that definitively. They're voting on whether Trump should be removed. And they're voting after the Supreme Court has said Trump lacks immunity from contempt. That weighs heavily on senators who care about the rule of law. That weighs on senators who care about respecting the courts. They can no longer hide behind constitutional arguments. They have to vote their conscience. The military interference leaks add another dimension too. These aren't just abstract constitutional questions. These are questions about actual government action, actual Pentagon involvement in Trump-related obstruction, actual military brass making decisions about military resources. These are real allegations that go beyond just Trump's personal contempt of court. These are allegations about systematic government obstruction at the highest levels. Let me give you the 7 things you actually need to understand about this ruling. Trump's immunity defense just completely died. It's dead. His entire legal strategy for the last several months has been built on the argument that sitting presidents have blanket immunity from contempt charges. That argument is now dead in the water. The Supreme Court killed it. The ruling explicitly says Trump lacks immunity for contempt violations. And if Trump lacks immunity, then logically everyone in his administration lacks immunity too. Patel lacks immunity. Anyone in the Trump administration who defies a court order lacks immunity. The entire legal shield that protected the administration is gone. They can be arrested. They can be prosecuted. They can be held accountable by the courts. Chief Justice Roberts siding with the liberals is the most significant political moment of this entire crisis. Roberts didn't have to side with the liberals. He's a conservative. He's sided with conservative positions in past rulings. But on this issue, presidential immunity from contempt, Roberts sided with the liberals. That tells you the constitutional argument was overwhelming. That tells you even the conservative Chief Justice couldn't vote to give Trump immunity. The rule of law won out over partisan loyalty. Roberts sided with the Constitution over party. Congress now has explicit Supreme Court validation for impeachment. The Democrats don't have to wonder whether they have constitutional authority to impeach Trump. The Supreme Court has told them they do. The court has said Congress can remove Trump for contempt defiance. Congress can remove him for oath-breaking. Congress can remove him for judicial obstruction. The Supreme Court has removed any constitutional doubt about whether Congress has the power. Now it's just a political question. Do Congress and the Senate have the will to do it? The 72-hour time frame on House Resolution 415 is is strategically brilliant. The Democrats are moving fast and decisively. They're moving before Senate Republicans can organize political opposition. They're moving before Trump can leverage his political power to pressure wavering Republicans. They're moving while the Supreme Court ruling is fresh in everyone's mind. They're moving while Capitol Hill is in shock from the decision. They're moving while the momentum gives them political advantage. This is strategic legislative action at the highest level. This Supreme Court ruling validates Judge Boasberg's entire approach. Boasberg has been threatening arrest for contempt. Boasberg has been saying federal marshals will enforce his orders. Boasberg has been treating Trump administration officials like any other person subject to court authority. The Supreme Court just said Boasberg is right. Judges have the power to enforce their orders. Judges can threaten arrest. Judges can order federal marshals to enforce contempt sanctions. The entire judicial system now has Supreme Court backing for holding Trump accountable. The riots at the Capitol show the stakes for Trump's supporters. They understand what this ruling means. They understand Trump's legal shield is gone. They understand impeachment is imminent, and they're panicking, they're rioting, they're desperate because they know the system is about to hold Trump accountable. They know the institutions are starting to work as designed. They know the checks and balances are starting to function, and they're terrified of what that means for Trump. This ruling changes the calculus for Senate Republicans completely. They can no longer claim impeachment is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court has ruled that it's constitutional. The Supreme Court has validated Congress's power to impeach and remove. So Senate Republicans can't hide behind constitutional arguments anymore. They have to vote their conscience. They have to decide whether they believe in the rule of law. They have to decide whether they believe in judicial authority. They have to decide whether they believe a president should be above the law or subject to the law like everyone else. The shadow docket ruling adds urgency to everything and changes the entire timeline. Normally, Supreme Court decisions come with detailed written opinions where the justices explain their complete reasoning, discuss legal precedent, address counterarguments. There's a full written record. But shadow docket decisions don't work that way. They're just the outcome, just a 5-4 vote, just a decision, which means there's no detailed reasoning for anyone to hide behind or debate endlessly. There's no fine print to parse. There's no complex legal analysis that people can spend months debating. Just a clear ruling. Trump lacks immunity. Congress can impeach and remove. That's it. Absolutely crystal clear. No room for interpretation. What this means for the midterms is also significant. Impeachment and potential removal changes everything about the 2026 midterms. If Trump is removed, the political landscape completely changes. The momentum completely changes. The midterms become a completely different election. Trump as a martyr removed by Congress looks very different than Trump as a sitting president. The dynamics shift entirely. The market implications are huge too. Markets hate uncertainty. Markets hate institutional chaos. A Supreme Court ruling about presidential immunity followed by impeachment proceedings, followed by potential removal. That's maximum institutional chaos that terrifies markets. That makes investors nervous. That makes economic planning difficult. This ruling doesn't just change politics. It changes financial markets. It changes business confidence. It changes everything about how the economy functions over the next several weeks. And for Trump personally, this is the moment his legal strategy collapses. For months, Trump has been relying on immunity arguments. For months, his lawyers have been telling him he's protected. For months, they've been saying he's above the law. The Supreme Court just said, that's not true. Trump is not above the law. Trump can be held accountable. Trump can be prosecuted. Trump can be removed from office. That's a fundamental shift in Trump's psychological reality. That's the moment when immunity stops being a shield and becomes just a story that lawyers told him. The path forward is clear now. There's no ambiguity about what comes next. The House votes to impeach Trump on these charges. That vote probably passes with all Democratic votes and maybe a few Republicans who break ranks. Then it goes to the Senate. The Senate holds a trial. The Senate votes on removal from office. And here's the critical part. If 17 Senate Republicans vote to convict, Trump is removed from office. He's gone. If they don't vote to convict, Trump stays president. But now the Supreme Court has made absolutely clear that removal is constitutional. Removal is legal. Removal is justified under the law. The only question remaining is whether the Senate has the political will to actually do it. This is the most significant constitutional moment of Trump's entire presidency. This is the moment when institutions start to actually constrain executive power. This is the moment when the checks and balances start to work as the founders designed. This is the moment when the Supreme Court says nobody is above the law, not even a sitting president, not even Trump. This is the moment that determines whether America is a nation of laws or a nation where some people are above the law. The Supreme Court has spoken definitively. Congress is moving into action. The Senate will decide the outcome, and America's constitutional future depends entirely on what happens next in these coming weeks. This is not political theater. This is not partisan conflict for ratings. This is the Constitution being tested. This is democracy being tested. This is the system working as the founders designed it to hold power accountable to the law. Stay locked in because impeachment is coming. And the question of whether Trump survives removal is now in the hands of the Senate and Senate Republicans. That vote will define not just Trump's presidency, but America's long-term commitment to the rule of law itself. Everything changes now.